gentlemen, welcome to the 28th International Congress COPIMERA 2021. Today, we're going to start the last block of the day. It's going to be in charge of Carlos Alarco. The topic is solutions in infrastructure, transport, supply chain, asset management, ports, railroads, and airports. Engineer Carlos Alarco Proaño is a mechanical engineer, graduated in the University Católica del Perú with 29 years of experience in Peru, Germany, and France in activities of design, engineering, and project management, industrial mining, and aeronautical. Currently, he has the position of country manager for Peru and president for Latin America region of the corporation. Go ahead, Carlos Alarco, bro.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank the organizing committee of COPIMERA 2021 for inviting me to this conference and talk and share about this relevant topic for all Latin America in the aspect of solutions in infrastructure for and I would like to start by saying that we're talking about projects that are probably the greatest priority in our country. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk about from the most basic, and this is a presentation that I've been sharing in many occasions. I realized that it's very important to first to understand where are the main problems and how can we promote projects. And I realized that even the concept of project is not totally clear. So we're going to go from the basics and then we're going to see some solutions to see how we can promote the effective development of projects. So, okay, so the first question is why is this relevant? Is relevant? Why is everybody interested in talking about infrastructure and infrastructure for transportation? And here's an example of something that was very positive in Peru, the launch of the National Infrastructure Plan for Competitiveness. This is an effort where the government of Peru, through the Ministry of Economics, worked the IDB, supported also the UK government with the embassy here in Peru, and a spectacular job was done. We never had a plan. So when we're talking about the gap in infrastructure, all of the ministries submitted their lists, and these were books were published on the gaps in infrastructure with hundreds and hundreds of, or sometimes $100 million to say what were the projects they had in their portfolio in each ministry. 100, 200, or 300 projects were submitted. But when doing this, the National Plan of Infrastructure, they another thing was told to the ministry: don't give me all the portfolio, just give me your priority projects. And the ministry responded, no, but these are my priorities and my 500 or 300 priority projects. So you don't really understand, because what can be done in the next 4 or 5 years. So this is what I have. So that's where a methodology with IDB, with the support of the UK government, to do some filtering or screening with different criteria, using a methodology that will enable all the ministries to submit their from different points of view and then the different criteria were basically considered the priority projects. And here we can see 52 projects that appeared, and 31 were from the Ministry of Transport and Communication. So in infrastructure, always the transportation projects, and here you see the figures, are the amounts of investments in millions of soles. You can see the importance that in this field. Here, there's a link. This plan is available. This public domain information, and you can see the details I highlighted. But it's very clear that the majority of these projects are infrastructure, transportation, airports, ports, everything, highways, railroads, metro, subways, and this is very important because it taught us how to prioritize something very realistic. We cannot have an infrastructure plan with 1,200 projects. That's undoable. It's not really easy to implement. So it's a dream, and if we don't reduce it to something like this, it's gonna keep being a dream for decades and decades. So this was done in 2019 was positive. We could say that it's obsolete, and now we need more hospitals, probably, and all the plans can be subject to changes and modifications. But this was the, let's say, the birth certificate of something for every country, every region, and every district. Yes, it's very important. Now, what has happened? This is a week ago in the news, Monday. Only 5 projects were completed under the National Plan of Infrastructure, something that started very good. And we saw there had been some other governments after the launch of this plan, and probably they didn't give the importance that the relevant importance. Maybe also pandemic, maybe it's also responsible for this. It's really sad that only 5 projects were completed under the National Plan for Infrastructure. So that's why this topic is very important. Infrastructure is always going to be important, but around, if we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about almost all these transportation projects. So first, let's analyze to define what is a project. Could be applicable to infrastructure or to any. Very quickly to set the context and to have a common terminology through the presentation. The definition of a project is a temporary effort that is done to create a product or a service that's unique. It has a start and a finish and needs an effort, and it's done gradually. The levels of efforts are variable through time, and that seen in a graph is what we have. A project that has a start, where we do the studies, what we call the profile of the project, the concept study, feasibility, etc. Then this was demonstrated that it made sense through different studies. Then we got the planning, the engineering, and then the execution, that is the effort, the greatest effort. Level of activity in the y-axis, you see the execution, and then we have the closure, uh, where the testing is done, and the startup and different stages that take us to the closure of the project. So all of this process, there is an accompany that is called control. So the every steps has a certain activities where we have the controls, the reports, the timetables, the schedules, KPIs, procurement, activities that of a project. And then talking about infrastructure projects, it's very common to hear of programs. Um, a project could be isolated. A hospital, for example, it's a project of a hospital, but if we have a group of hospitals or a group of infrastructure that have something in common because they are grouped by region or the same type of infrastructure, we call it a program, infrastructure program, which is easier to manage if we see them as programs. An example of this, the Pan American Games that were held in Lima in 2019, it was a program. The commonality, all the infrastructures were associated to a sport event that had a deadline, and that was worked as a program, just to be clear in the terminology. Um, in the topics that we're going to talk today, here we see the project, but it's important to study what happens before, what should happen before the project, and what should happen before after the project. Infrastructure is not, it starts operating, yes, but so therefore we have to see what's going to happen later after the project is completed. When the project is finished, it's called an operation. It's not called a project because the project is completed, and from there we call it operation. So, what is the important to do before the project? Here you have what we were talking about. We plan so that project can happen. There has to be a plan to determine that is a priority. It was worthwhile. It would make sense. It has to be a solution for funding of that project before starting, and political will. Uh, the government should commit that that project is going to keep working after a government period or not. And it has to be some studies for demand that will justify that that project is really needed. They need to have some the infrastructure, what kind plots of land, and we have solutions to have all the lands needed. If we have some resources to manage all of these are questions that we have to ask ourselves before the project starts. And then after the project, then we have confirmed if the demand, the theoretical demand, once it starts, confirm or promote that demand. Encourage people to use a system, transportation system, promote the use of, if we're talking about a metro system, people will trust and see it's reliable and the benefits of that infrastructure. We need to see who's going to operate it. Somebody is going to in charge of that everything should go forward to operate, no interruptions, the appropriate maintenance, and we need to consider the adjustments of the market. Sometimes in time through the years it's going to change and we have to adjust all these parameters based on this. So this is a small introduction because one of the things that are failing in our country about the infrastructure, and when we talk about infrastructure, everything is 80 or 90% infrastructure for transportation. And if we talk about 30, 40 years, maybe the big problem was the funding, and there was not enough money to invest in these things. Right now, there are many ways of getting funds for projects, and that was not the main issue. That's not the reason why we see these gaps, big gaps in Latin America. The main issue now, from my point of view, is that the political will and funding is available, the plan is completed, the plan is available, and why this doesn't happen. Why the people or the citizen has to suffer and wait for so long, many years, decades, to have a transportation system, to have a good highway, to have a good airport. Why many years have to go by? And the answer is management. because there isn't a experience or the tools, the management tools available, and the actors, and people don't even know how to start. Um, what kind of people to recruit? Who do we trust? So here are some reflections. This is a long text, and here I kind of summarize it. Experiences and lessons learned in infrastructure programs that are gathered through years, but this is applicable around the world. Importance to have experience in planning when we have infrastructure projects or programs. We need to work for professionals that have a lot of experience in planning um, and execution, of course, and make sure that all the people who are involved are focused in the objectives. That the participation of the specialists bring the people who have 10, 15, 20, 30 years or 40 years in that topic, that who master this topic is their specialty, who has always seen this and knows this perfectly. Bring people specialized in supply chain, massive supply chain, because here when we buy some goods, it's not we're gonna buy just a small a pump or an engine. We're gonna buy tens of millions of dollars a month. So you need to have some processes, systems, very big systems that allow the supply, difficult supply systems. It's a big number of things, of purchasing and acquisitions of contracts. To set the KPIs, the key performance indicators, that many times it's not chosen correctly, and we have a problem of objective. These are the objectives we have on a nice piece of paper, and then when we see the incentives around us, sometimes they oppose to the objectives. We want everything to be cheap, but what about the objectives? No, it doesn't really matter, but we're going to have this incentive. So no reflection is done when incentives are created, and we don't see that they are totally opposite to the objectives. We think that the projects shouldn't have any changes because then we got into a problem. No, projects are characterized by having changes, many changes all the time, but these changes are managed. So bring people specializing in the change management. Of course, we're talking about changes that are justifiable because nature sometimes plays against us, the geotech or the soil or the ground study, and this needs to be managed. And of course, to choose the structure contract so that this doesn't end in a big litigation where everybody fights with everybody, and the final user, is waiting for this to resolve these controversies because the contractual structure was not well done. And here's then where we talk about the PMO, Project Management Office, as one of the tools to solve these problems. Where again, I'm going to summarize this so that we don't read all this text. PMO is a management system, one of many. There are many management systems, but PMO, I think, is the most appropriate for big projects, especially infrastructure. When we manage them by program, it's more efficient. If they say, okay, I want a PMO to build this hospital. Okay, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, and that's it. But when we have a PMO for a group of projects, that it represents something that is more complex because it's scattered in a different region, or the amount of infrastructure is so big, it's very complex, then we make better use of it. Then we have the PMO team, and that integrated to the other side of the table. The Ministry X, infrastructure, transportation, the regional government, the central government, the mayor, who knows. But there has to be a team that is integrated between what we call the client and the PMO. They have to think that they're just one team and they're going to work as one team. And then they're going to set a very firm working relationship, arm to arm. A team that is focused in the success of the project to have this as their objective. There's going to be other priorities, but still the success of the project is the main objective. And then again, we have some, as a team, objectives and incentives aligned, and of course, to work with a lot of respect and a lot of trust. These are things that the PMO has as main characteristics. What issues can appear in infrastructure projects? And this is not Latin America, this is everywhere. Quality doesn't comply with the objectives, defective execution, failures, highways that do not withstand a rain or a bridge doesn't that collapses, with deadlines. Uh, this project was for 2021, but I don't know when it's going to be finished. Maybe a couple more years. And of course, while I'm here explaining this, and everybody's thinking about more than one example where this has happened. Cost issues. This was going to cost 100 million. Now it's 200 million. Yes, but there was a bad estimation at the beginning, many excuses, and many examples that come to our mind when we talk about this. Then we have some risks. I, as a government, want this infrastructure project, and the contractor give him all the responsibility, all the risk on his side. The government should not take any risk. And what happens? Then we have a litigation because there has to be a balance between the risk on both ends. So what do we see? Quality, deadlines, cost, and risk. One go for one end, the other one goes to the other end. And sometimes decisions are made and says, okay, to comply with the quality and to the deadline, let's bring everything by plane, so we sacrifice cost. Or to fulfill with cost and deadlines, we sacrifice quality. So we have to learn that all these parameters have to go one by one, and they have to comply simultaneously. I don't sacrifice one to get 20 on the other courses. I have to score perfect in all the courses. Otherwise, the projects will not be successful. You're there, and we can see, yes, it's working, but if it costs double, it took longer, bad quality, it doesn't fulfill the objective, then we cannot really call it a successful project. To these difficulties in Latin America, we have some challenges. Transparency. How can we make sure that the projects are covered by a ethical behavior from all the parties? How can we so the information is so transparent that can be shared openly, and that there is a website where everybody can see, and of course the first one who should have access to those pages where everything is transparent is the enforcers, the controller. They could open the lab and see the bidding process, the scoring, the projects, why one was awarded and not the other one. Selection process that are impeccable. They are good practices, and we're not using that transparency in all the purchasing and contracting. And of course, to have a team where we can trust. They know how to manage people, personnel with training experience, not to be in doubt or difficulties in starting a project. And then when we start this project, how to do so. The next step is also done. And of course, this point is very important. The continuity depending on the government in office. If it's very common that the people change, the authorities change, ministers change, and then the project loses its priority. The government changes every certain number of years, and this disappears because the next government doesn't really care about it and don't give it the importance it deserves. So these are special challenges in Latin America. So what to do? We're not going to be complaining, but this is an overview. And we can reflect on it. So the PMO is one of the solutions. It's not the only solution because it's not a silver bullet. It's a tool that gives you, reduces the likelihood of failure and reduces it significantly. Try not to think that the PMO is something that I have 50 projects. Okay, so I'm gonna have 50 PMOs. Try to group them by program and have one or two or maybe three PMOs that are in charge of all that portfolio. Work with a national plan of infrastructure. The plan could have some variations in time. That's not a problem. And then, of course, dimension the management tools based on each kind of program. In a program, we can have 50 people working in a PMO, another 100, because different characteristics, but of course, looking for these benefits. So this is a detail of the activities of a PMO. We can divide them in 5 or 6 groups: control, planning, the management of the timetables, change management, document management, the management with stakeholders. This is a group of professionals that have this mission. There's another group that is in the delivery of the project, the blueprints, procurement systems, the logistic processes, the commissioning, etc. Another one is the management part. That is not the same. Management is something with contract management, with the accounting, finance, all that has to do with human resources, all the informatics that has to have the support, and then we have the legal component where we have auditing, um, insurance policies for the project, all the general counsel in a project, and then the assurance, um, quality assurance, sustainability, environment, etc. Haven't seen from another point of view the same thing, but grouping them as wheels, where we have the same groups, a team that looks after the construction management, another group that is for documents, another group that is safety, environment, and health, another group that looks at the planning and quality assurance. Each group is a leader and a work team, but all of them work articulated as a machine. So this is another way of defining the PMO. It's like the umbrella that groups all of these activities. But these activities do not work isolated. They work, as you can see in the picture, it's synchronized. The integrity is something that there is a solution, but this is very hard. It's not really hard. In the private sector, we work with teams that are trained and where there are systems that can reduce or eliminate the irregularities and lack of ethics. Here are some tips. Um, First of all, to set a code of conduct, a document of amount of pages specific for the program, and to be mandatory reading before you hire somebody. Test them on the code of conduct that everybody understands. There are many examples that can be used that comes from the industry. The basic ethics for programs that can be now they can be online. So the instructors can be in any part of the world and they could give these courses. Sometimes we use real cases, examples, practical examples that happened, and based on this, there can be a discussion. For some of these, it's a it's a minor fault. For other one, it is a crime. So these workshops uh, allow you to have these alignments in terms of what's good and what's bad. So weekly meetings, we should have them talking about safety, health, environment, and ethics. It's very important that not only talk about safety, but also these other topics and ethics is something that on a weekly basis, maybe 2 minutes, uh, tell something important about ethics. Workshops, implementations of whistleblowing, anonymous whistleblowing systems, and the appointing of an officer of compliance and ethics committee, and he's the one to try to solve any problem that might appear. This is very limited, but we could be talking hours and hours about this and give you a number of tips of how to, in the different countries, doesn't matter if it's developed, underdeveloped, the human being can change. And we can have a control over this aspect, which is very, very important. The cost of a PMO. I have money just for the project, so I don't have money for a PMO. So what's the cost of a PMO? There's not a list price. We could be talking about statistical data. Maybe if we see the last project that had a PMO, how much was paid for that PMO service? 2 or 5% of, so we're talking about 100 million, 200 million, is around 5%. If we talk about a project of 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 million, maybe 2%. So we spend that money, and then we're going to have all the benefit. What if we don't spend that amount of money? Some of you may say, well, we save this money and we don't have the PMO, so what's going to happen? Then some the costs appear, these hidden costs appear, these cost of disorder, the cost of integrity, the cost of not having control of anything. So the cost of not having a PMO are far greater than the cost of the PMO itself. This is just hidden. These costs that do not appear in the newspaper. Nobody knows about those. Maybe there are not going to be headlines about the cost of disorder, the lack of transparency, the delays, the things bringing them by plane because they're so desperate. Those things are not going to appear, but these are real. A government spends more when there is no PMO office. Here in my presentation, I have some slides to share with you, some experience, international experience, and I'm going to go very quickly so that we can open the table with the panel. Some examples, I'm going to focus an example that I really like, and we did this with Bechtel in the last 7 years. I chose it on purpose because this is not example, but this works in USA, Europe, or something. In our country, it's not going to work. This is a project that, an experience of PMO that happened at the Republic Gabonese. This is a country that has many commonalities with our country. Uh, Poverty, to have corruption, an acceptable corruption index, to have problems in education. Um, Here, an agreement was signed with the president and republic, the government of Gabon and Bechtel to work all of the infrastructure projects. So the National Plan for Infrastructure is a way how this relationship started. 175 projects, around 20,000 million dollars in different fundings. Some of them were public, and the other one private, private public concession, a little bit of everything, and things like housing, roads, air transport, ports, railroads, water for consumption, and water for energy, infrastructure in telecommunications, education, and health. Does it sound familiar? Of course, similar to our ministries, right? So in all the countries, the infrastructure is divided more or less in the same sections. And this is it started 7 years with a number of agreements and activities, signed a master plan of infrastructure, um, set some policies, very safety, quality, sustainability, the general principles. Agree that to work, we're not talking about we're not talking about shares. We're talking about how much effort, the shoulder 50 to 50 as a partner, as one team. And starting from classifying in some ministries and based on the structure of each country, this could change. But here, they were by families, and these are colors, so that there is the responsibility by each ministry. And then the plan started, and these were the results. At the end of 5 years, this was published as milestones. How much was invested in the first stage for housing? Here we have all the highways and the roads. Here we have ports, airports, year by year. And this is a report that I hope we had maybe someday a progress to say these are the railroads in Peru, how much was invested year by year, how we're progressing, water for consumption, water for energy. Uh, all of these were infrastructures, and as you can see in parallel, everybody, these were going telecommunications, wireless, fiber. Here we see education, the number of infrastructure for dorms in the different educational facilities, primary, secondary, high school, university, technical studies based on the plan. And there was a clear investment. And here, as a bonus, here we have an industrial port the country needed, was included and was able to be done. A city that was port, city, and industrial center, but world class. So I'm a bit ahead of time, and if there are some questions, or we could go straight to the panel. I'm open to attend any question from them. from the audience.
Muchas gracias, ingeniero.
Thank you very much, engineer. I want to thank your presence on behalf of COPIMERA 2021. And we're going to go for a round of questions and then we can go for the round table. Okay.